Most people spend their lives surrounded by walls, climate-controlled, Wi-Fi connected, and padded for convenience. They've never felt morning frost on bare feet or watched a fire come to life from nothing but friction. But for Eustace Conway, that kind of raw elemental living wasn't a retreat, it was a calling. Tucked deep in the Blue Ridge Mountains, Turtle Island Preserve became more than a home. It was a living classroom, a resistance to modern numbness, a place where people came to remember what it meant to be human. But when the outside world caught wind of what he'd built, it didn't come with curiosity. It came with consequences. This is the story of a man who tried to live on his own terms, until those terms collided with a world that no longer speaks the language of self-reliance. Eustace Conway didn't just reject modern life, he left it like a man fleeing a burning building, convinced the air outside was cleaner. Born in 1961 in Columbia, South Carolina, his world was built on tradition and rigor. His father, Dr. Eustace Conway III, was a chemical engineering professor, disciplined, intellectual, logical. His mother was no less committed, holding a master's degree in education. The Conway household valued knowledge, but it was structured, scheduled, and civilized. That was never enough for Eustace. As a boy, he gravitated toward the edge of the wild. He would sneak off for hours, hunting bugs, tracking deer prints, building fires with sticks instead of matches. These weren't games, they were rehearsals. Every scraped knee and cold night spent under the stars deepened his belief that real life wasn't found under fluorescent lights or behind a desk. It was found in the woods, barefoot, vulnerable, and awake. By age 12, he had already slept alone in the mountains. Not on a dare, not as a scout, but as a declaration. He belonged there. And at 17, he did something few teenagers do with any seriousness. He left home not for college or work, but for freedom. He traded his bedroom for a hand-sewn teepee, made from animal hides and tree limbs. His tools were primitive. His food was foraged or caught. His bed was the ground, and yet he thrived. Eustace didn't just live off the land. He learned its language, its patience, its silence. Where others saw hardship, he saw clarity. Over the years, he traveled the country, not by car or plane, but by foot and horseback. In one of his most mythic feats, he rode from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific, crossing over 2,000 miles in just 103 days. The New York Times questioned the feat. Critics pulled out old records. They found two young boys, Bud and Temple Abernathy, who had made a longer ride in 1911 at ages 11 and 7. But Eustace didn't challenge them. He didn't need to. His point wasn't about who did it first. It was about doing it now, when no one else would. The media began to take notice, but never quite knew what to make of him. Was he a survivalist? A mystic? A rebel? To Eustace, those questions missed the mark. He wasn't trying to escape society. He was trying to remind it of something it had forgotten, that human beings were once capable of thriving with nothing but their wits, their hands, and the land beneath them. Turtle Island Preserve was born from that conviction. More than a farm or a camp, it became a living museum of ancient skills and natural rhythm. He began teaching others how to live off-grid, not as a novelty but as a necessity. In an age of hyperconnectivity, Eustace was offering something radical, reconnection. He called it real food, real fire, real work. But what he built was more than real. It was rare. For years, Turtle Island existed quietly, a whisper of an older world tucked inside the forested ridges of North Carolina's Blue Ridge Mountains. No billboards, no social media, just a gravel path that led to something few people even realized still existed. A place where the modern world ended and ancestral memory began. Then came the cameras. In 2012, Mountain Men premiered on the History Channel. It wasn't like the high-octane survival shows of the time, filled with dramatics and scripted danger. This was raw, unscripted endurance, a life without shortcuts. And Eustace Conway stood out immediately. While other cast members battled icy rivers or hunted game in the Alaskan backwoods, Eustace was doing something different. He wasn't escaping into the wilderness. He had built his life inside it. Viewers watched as he split logs by hand, trained horses to haul timber, built cabins from raw wood, and mentored a rotating crew of apprentices. His days were filled with the kind of labor most people only read about in old books, cutting firewood to survive the winter, repairing roofs without nails, harvesting vegetables by moonlight. There was no set, no script, no illusion. Just Eustace, the land, and the life he had always lived. But something subtle and powerful began to shift. The more people saw his way of life, the more they romanticized it. The image of the off-grid mountain man struck a chord with a world overwhelmed by technology, traffic, and artificial light. Suddenly, Turtle Island wasn't just a preserve, it was a symbol. People wrote letters, sent donations, and showed up asking to be taught. And with that attention came a paradox. The very show that gave Eustace a platform also drew the gaze of the one force he'd spent his life avoiding, the system. Inspectors, code enforcers, legal notices. The same cameras that documented his lifestyle also made it impossible to remain unseen. What was once a sanctuary was now under a microscope. Still, in those early episodes, none of that was visible. What viewers saw was a man doing what he loved, riding horseback through mountain fog, standing barefoot in the stream, carving logs by firelight. His movements were precise, his words few but sharp. He had a presence that didn't need embellishment. And then there was Preston Roberts, his close friend, his brother in arms. Together they worked the land like it was their inheritance, fixing what broke, teaching what mattered, and living a life as old as the hills they stood on. But behind every beautiful frame was the mounting reality. The world was watching, and watching too closely. For Eustace Conway, Turtle Island wasn't just home, it was sacred ground. Every log had been lifted by hand. Every path had been carved with purpose. The structures weren't just shelters, they were statements, evidence that you didn't need modernity to build a meaningful life. But in the eyes of the law, it was something else entirely. In June 2013, the stillness of Turtle Island was broken. Not by a storm or a wildfire, but by paper. Regulations, inspectors, permits. Watauga County officials arrived with clipboards and questions. They didn't see what Conway had built. They saw what he hadn't filed. Dozens of cabins, sheds, outhouses, and workshops, none of them up to modern code. No plumbing blueprints, no standardized electrical systems, no stamped lumber from industrial suppliers. The buildings had been constructed with hand tools and old-world knowledge, not by licensed contractors with permit stamps. The message from the county was clear: comply or dismantle. The ultimatum didn't just threaten his structures, it threatened his mission. Because how do you teach primitive living in buildings that weren't allowed to be primitive? How do you pass on the knowledge of ancestral survival inside facilities designed to meet government standards? Eustace was stunned. Not angry. Not theatrical. Just stunned. To him, this wasn't a matter of safety. It was a matter of sense. Why should a man need government permission to build a log barn from trees he felled with his own hands? Why should an off-grid farmstead powered by horses and solar panels be judged by suburban standards? And yet, there it was, 78 pages of violations. Page after page listing faults in construction, outdated sanitation, improper materials, non-compliant electrical work. The office powered by a micro-hydroelectric system built by Appalachian State students? Flagged. The compost toilets? Flagged. Even the hand-split shingle roof of the main barn was scrutinized, vented under a metal sheet instead of through it. To the inspectors, it was unsafe. To Eustace, it was the future. The irony was brutal. The very show that gave the world a glimpse of what he had built, Mountain Men, had also exposed him to the very forces he'd worked his whole life to avoid. Before the cameras, there were no surprise visits, no code violations, no accusations. But now, there were letters, complaints, warrants. Even more devastating, the land that had been his for decades, the land that taught others how to grow food, make fire, and reconnect with the earth, was being reduced to a bureaucratic checklist. And for a moment, it looked like it might all vanish. Before Turtle Island made headlines, before code violations and television spotlights, there was an accident. One moment that changed everything. In August 2005, Eustace Conway welcomed a group of North Carolina teaching fellows to the preserve. It was meant to be an educational retreat, an invitation to slow down, step outside the classroom, and learn from the land itself. The group gathered at the preserve's entrance for an orientation, and one of Conway's staffers began demonstrating an ancient sling, the kind used centuries ago to hurl stones at wild game. It was meant to impress. It did something else. The sling released prematurely. A rock whipped backward, not forward, and struck Kimberly Baker, a teacher from Wilmington, directly in the face. The blow was devastating. She lost vision in her right eye. What was supposed to be a moment of learning became a lifelong injury. In the months that followed, the preserve's rustic simplicity was buried beneath paperwork. Baker filed a lawsuit. Two of Eustace's staff members eventually settled for $400,000 combined. But Conway himself wasn't spared. He was ordered to pay $75,000 as part of a mediated agreement and was expected to mortgage part of Turtle Island to meet the terms within a year. But Eustace didn't meet the deadline, not because he refused, but because the process, like everything outside the preserve, moved to a rhythm he had never learned to dance to. Baker returned to court, this time suing for breach of contract. The second case dragged on for years, creating a growing storm cloud above the sanctuary Conway had spent decades building. The case wasn't resolved until April 2012, mere weeks before Mountain Men aired its first episode. It was a strange coincidence, or maybe it wasn't, because the timing of the lawsuit's resolution aligned almost perfectly with the moment Turtle Island became a household name. Still, Conway remained guarded. His agreement with the History Channel prevented him from commenting on how the show was edited or what was left out. But one thing was certain: reality television thrives on tension. And for the producers, Turtle Island's legal challenges became a ready-made narrative arc. In the eyes of the camera, it looked like the government was coming for the mountain man's land, and in some ways, that's exactly what it felt like. What had begun as an unfortunate accident in the woods had rippled outward into legal battles, public records, and a system that didn't know how to categorize someone like Eustace. He wasn't a business. He wasn't a school. He wasn't just a man with land. He was something older. And suddenly, that didn't fit anywhere. Of all the storms that ever rolled through Turtle Island, ice, fire, bureaucrats, none hit harder than the one no one saw coming. It was the summer of 2017 when Preston Roberts, Eustace Conway's closest friend and lifelong companion in the preserve's mission, began to feel unwell. Not tired, not overworked, something deeper, something alarming. Within days, concern turned into emergency. Doctors found a large tumor on Preston's liver. It wasn't operable, it wasn't waiting, and within 3 weeks, just like that, he was gone. He was 60 years old. For those who had come to know him through Mountain Men, Preston was the quiet force beside Eustace, the calm to the storm, the kind of man who could repair a roof with one hand and teach a life lesson with the other, all without raising his voice. He was a skilled woodsman, an artist with a blade, and someone who made the hard work of primitive life seem effortless. But to Eustace, he was something more. He was a brother. After Preston's passing, Eustace didn't retreat from the public eye, but something in him shifted. He wrote a public tribute filled with pain, reverence, and a kind of love that doesn't often get spoken aloud. He described Preston as the most sincere man he had ever known. Someone who gave to others without asking for anything in return. A man who loved his wife Kathleen with such fierce tenderness that, once during her illness, he put on a pink tutu in the middle of winter just to make her laugh. That's who Preston was. The loss wasn't just personal, it was structural. Preston wasn't just a friend, he was part of Turtle Island's bones. The way he taught, the way he moved through the forest, the way his hands shaped cabins, tools, and minds. When he died, something in the land felt quieter, almost subdued. And for the people who knew the place best, it was more than grief, it was absence. A silence that didn't fade. Visitors still come, interns still walk the same trails, but near Morning Watch Hill, not far from the old medicine wheel, is a grave marked only by the trees and the whispers they carry. It's Preston's. There are no marble headstones, just earth, roots, and offerings, feathers, carved stones, folded notes, left behind by those he inspired. Even now, when the wind moves through the pine needles in that part of the forest, it feels different, slower, more reverent, as if the mountain too remembers him. And for Eustace, who has spent a lifetime enduring cold winters and complex systems, it was this loss, not legal codes or camera crews, that truly tested his resolve. Because you can fight the state, you can argue with inspectors, but there is no negotiation with grief. Despite everything, the lawsuits, the shutdown, the inspections, the loss, Eustace didn't quit. In June 2013, after public outcry and legislative support, a new North Carolina law gave places like Turtle Island limited exemption from standard building codes. Turtle Island reopened, and Eustace kept teaching, kept splitting logs, kept reminding people that they were made for more than screen time and takeout. But something changed. He once told author Elizabeth Gilbert, "When I go out in public, I try to look like this wild guy who just came off the mountain. And I know it's mostly an act. I'm aware of what I'm doing." That act was the price he paid to keep the dream alive. And maybe, just maybe, it's the only way people will listen in a world that's forgotten how to hear the wind in the trees. Eustace Conway has already proven that he can survive the cold, the hunger, and the wild. But the deeper question is this: can he survive the system? Can a man keep a vision alive in a world built to shut it down? Or does every wild dream eventually bow to paperwork and pressure? Leave a comment and share your thoughts. What do you think about Turtle Island and Eustace Conway's fight to preserve the old ways? If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more untold stories just like this one. And don't stop here. Check out the other videos on your screen. Turtle Island still stands. The fire still burns. The mountain remembers.